G'day guys, bit of a tutorial video I guess today. I had a question come up recently about different chargers and some of the connections that come with them, and I've had this experience myself as well. I had one of the IMAX chargers, very popular, and you get a selection of cables that arrive with them, the ones that plug into the charger, and they've got a connector that then goes into a series of other plugs. But I guess the question comes up, what happens when the plugs they give you don't actually fit the batteries you've got? Now I've actually got two sets of these plugs. None of them came with XT60. One set that I do have here have Deans, which is good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a quick tutorial on how you might solder what you've got with a plug that you need. Let's have a look at what you might need. First of all, you need, at a minimum, you need a soldering iron and some solder. Now you can get these pretty much any hardware store, electronic shop, places like J-Car if you have those in where you live. A couple of extra things that are nice. I've got a really cheap stand that comes with this sort of soldering iron. I've also bought myself, this is a solder sucker to remove solder, so you can depress that, put that onto the hot joint, and then push the button to suck the solder away. And the other thing is the helping hands. If you don't have a set of helping hands, set of pliers with a rubber band is also a really good alternative, and I might show you how that goes when we get around to doing the plug. Okay, so the connectors that I've got, this is the plug here that goes into the charger, and then all of the wires that come along with it have Deans connectors, which is kind of handy. If I had a Deans battery, I could plug that straight in, or one of these selectors are JR or alligator clips. Now most of my batteries, or pretty much all of my batteries, are actually XT60. This is really applicable for any of the ones that you're doing. What I'm going to do here is make up a connector for my XT60, and so that I'm not chopping the end off here and I can still use the other plugs, I've got a female XT60, a female Deans, and I'm going to solder that together with the XT60. If, for example, you don't have a matching plug to make up your own, have a look at the ones that you have got. Try and decide which ones you might not use. So for example, if you don't think you'll ever need to charge up something from your battery charger with the crocodile clips there, you can use that, snip that off, and then you can solder that on. Then you still have the JR, which is pretty common for your smaller batteries, and I don't actually know the name of that. I do have my controller battery has that sort of plug on it as well. So I'm not gonna chop these ones up. I'll keep those. I will keep that only because I have some Deans plugs, and I can make up my own, making sure that we've got positive, negative to negative. Alright, so the other thing you're going to need here is some wire, if you're not using something that comes with your charger. And here, the only thing you really need to make sure is that the amp draw, or the rating on the wire here, is going to cover off what your charger output is. Now my charger has a maximum of 5 amps. This one's good to 10. It's that auto cable that I got from Repco or one of the auto shops, which should be just fine for the job. One of the other things I did forget to mention up front is one of the things for a nice professional finish is a bit of shrink wrap. So when you get these things delivered, they have the small amount of, this is heat shrink tube. If you haven't seen this, once again, this is probably available from most electronic shops, your hobby stores, Hobby King. They do a meter of this stuff for a couple of bucks in different sizes. Doesn't really matter the colour. I did buy a bag of assorted colours and sizes for about $5. This stuff sort of does last you. You only need little bits at a time. The thing to take note of is before you cut it is make sure you've got enough length to cover the open exposed wire, and make sure that the diameter is going to fit over the actual terminal. So in this case I have a smaller diameter for the Dean's T connector, and that will fit over the connector there. But what I'll need is actually a bigger one, because that won't fit all the way over the connector for the XT60. It's not big enough, so I'll have to use and I'll use my bigger black diameter, and that will shrink down and cover over the connector. That's just to make sure that you don't get a short circuit on any of the wires. So I've cut the length of wire that's going to go between my two connectors. I happen to have a black and a red, but it doesn't really matter. I guess once you've got the connectors on, as long as they're connected correctly in the first place, the colours just give you a guide. The first thing you want to do is with your wire is to strip the ends of the wire and to tin that. And to tin it just means to put a bit of solder on. So I usually use just a set of side cutters and squeeze the wire so it presses that, and then just a little clip on either side just to loosen that wire, and that should pull off, leaving the exposed wire. Give that a twist. And to tin the wire, this is where your soldering iron comes in, and I like to leave that on the stand. What you want to do is make sure you heat up the wire. Have your solder ready. And with the heat of the wire, the solder should flow into the fibres of the wire. At any rate, you want to repeat that on all the ends of the wire before we look at the plugs. Now, where I've stripped the wire, there's actually quite a bit left over. So what I might do is actually trim that down to try and reduce the amount of exposed area. So when you solder that onto the tab, you want the insulation as close as possible. Then when you cut the heat shrink, you only need a small amount. So let's trim those up. And put those on. Okay, so here's the critical part. Making sure that you put the right wire onto the right connector of your connections. So the first one I'm doing here is a connection onto the plug that will go into the charger. So the negative on top, positive on the bottom. And one way to make sure that you do that is to actually put them together. Now that also helps disperse the heat when you're putting the soldering iron onto the tab and putting the solder on. Now, as I mentioned, if you don't have a set of the helping hands, you can always just use a set of pliers with a rubber band around the handle to hold them closed. And that helps to hold the plug up for when you do your soldering. Let's do the red one first. This is where you need 3 hands to get enough heat into the terminal. To melt the solder. Alright guys, I'm not sure what I missed there on the end, but unfortunately the other camera I was using ran out of batteries and memory at the same time. So we're swapped over now to the GoPro, and we'll keep going with the connection. So we've got the positive wire onto the connection, and now the negative wire is next. But since we have the helping hands there, let's get them into action. Now you want to apply a bit of heat to the terminal, but not so much that you melt. And while that's still molten, get your wire in there. And the wire that you've tinned, now should all flow together. You can test that join. Nice and strong. We'll leave that plugged in. To shrink that on there, you do need to apply some heat, either a cigarette lighter, or if you've got a hot blowgun, or if you haven't got those things, just the iron, not the tip. Don't get too much heat in there. It's the end of the iron, and that will shrink that down. To keep a nice tight grip on the wires. So we've got one end of the wire on the plug. Now we want to look at the other end of the wire, and for a nice neat job, might be time to have a look and make sure that they are the same length. I did cut them the same length, but we have trimmed them a little bit. So what we might do is actually just even those up, re-strip and re-tin them real quick. Alright, now with the XT60, it is good to have another plug in the other end, just to make sure that that doesn't deform. And we'll put that in our helping hands again. And in this case, we're going to fill up these two with solder. Be careful not to overfill it. On the XT60, it does have a marking on the side here, the positive and negative. The spare plug I've got actually is a connector, so I've got that reinforced there, making sure that we are going to put in the positive into the positive and the negative into the negative. Now it is important here, put on the shrink wrap before we put these ones in. Once you've got the other plugs on, there's no way to get the shrink wrap on. And so with our solder already in there, we just need to reheat that back up, and the wire. Might just get a little bit more on there. just to make sure that we've got that filled in. With the solder joints there, we're just going to apply a bit of heat to that heat shrink again with the end of the soldering iron, not too close to the tip. Shrink that wire down. And there's our new connector. Here's the plug, the XT60 plug that I needed, with the original plugs, and we can all still go back together into the new charger. So really, if you're just getting into it and you need this sort of thing, soldering iron, a couple of simple tools, heat shrink, and of course a little bit of wire, unless you want to sacrifice one of the plugs that you do get with it. And it's a pretty simple job. My soldering's still not the best, but gets the job done. And if you have any questions, post them as comments. If you like the video, click like. If you want to see some more stuff like this, send me a message, tell me what you need. If you want to see more flying, let me know about that too. Thanks for watching, guys.